Emma Valentina had spent the last 20 years of her life studying things that most people believed did not exist. She worked in a research station that orbited the outer rings of the Andromeda Galaxy, a place so far from Earth that the sun appeared as nothing more than a dim star among countless others. Her colleagues thought she was obsessed, maybe even a little crazy, but Emma did not care what they thought. She knew what she was searching for, and she knew it was out there somewhere waiting to be found. The space station where she worked was called the Odyssey, and it housed only 15 scientists and support staff. It was lonely work, but Emma preferred loneliness to the crowds of people who constantly doubted her theories and dismissed her research. She was part human and part elf, a mixture that made her different from pure humans but also different from the elf colonies that existed on the distant worlds. Her mother had been from the Silver Mist colony, a place that had been forgotten by most of galactic society. Her father had been a human explorer who fell in love with her mother during a trade expedition. Emma had inherited her mother's pointed ears, her natural affinity with animals, and her deep connection to the living world. She had inherited her father's curiosity and his need to understand the universe through science and data. This combination made her uniquely suited for the work she did. Most scientists dismissed ancient myths and legends as nothing more than stories. Emma understood that myths often contained kernels of truth, distorted through time but still containing real information about real events. That particular morning started like any other. Emma was sitting in the observation deck with a cup of coffee that had been reheated so many times, it barely tasted like coffee anymore. She was reviewing data from the deep space probes that scanned the regions beyond the station. The probes had been sending back images and readings for weeks, all of them showing the same empty void of space, asteroids, and nebulae. She was about to close the file and move on to other projects when something changed on the screen. A new signal appeared in the outer region, approximately 50,000 kilometers from the station. At first, Emma thought it might be a malfunction in the equipment. She ran a diagnostic check and confirmed that all the systems were functioning perfectly. The signal was real. It was coming from inside a nebula that had never shown any signs of habitation or activity before. The most interesting part was that the signal carried biological data. Emma's hands began to shake. She pulled up the genetic analysis that the computer had automatically generated when it detected the new life-form signature. The DNA sequences were unlike anything she had ever seen before. They were complex in ways that suggested artificial engineering rather than natural evolution. Someone had designed these life forms intentionally. Someone very advanced had done the work. She spent 3 hours analyzing the data, cross-referencing it with every database she could access. Then she found something that made her heart stop. The genetic sequences matched patterns from ancient Earth mythology. The creatures the computer was detecting had characteristics that matched the description of dragons. Dragons were not supposed to be real. They were fantasy, imagination, the products of human creativity and fear. Yet here was scientific data proving that something matching that description actually existed somewhere in this galaxy. Emma knew what she had to do. She had to go there and investigate. She sent a message to the station commander, Dr. Raymond Foster, informing him of the discovery. His response came back within the hour. The message contained 3 words: proceed at your own risk. That was all the authorization Emma needed. She spent the next day preparing her ship. The vessel was called the Sky Whisper, and it was built for long-range exploration and solo missions. It was equipped with advanced scanning equipment, defensive systems, and enough supplies to sustain her for several months. Emma also loaded it with weapons, though she hoped she would not need them. If the creatures she was going to find were truly dragons, weapons might be useless anyway. The journey to the coordinates took 3 weeks. Emma spent most of that time in meditation and study. She reviewed everything she could find about ancient myths. She read about dragons from human cultures, from Asian traditions, from European legends. She studied the old texts from her mother's colony that spoke of the ancient times when the first world was created. She performed the meditation exercises that elf warriors used to center themselves and open their minds to their surroundings. During one of her meditation sessions, something strange happened. Emma felt a presence in her mind, almost like someone was calling to her from very far away. It was not words exactly, but more like feelings and images. She saw mountains made of stone so tall they touched the sky. She saw creatures with wings and scales, intelligent and powerful and incredibly old. She saw them waiting, waiting in the darkness for someone to come and find them. The vision was so intense that it broke her concentration and left her gasping for air. Emma knew then that the creatures were real and that they were aware of her approach. They were calling to her across the vast distance of space. She increased the ship's speed, pushing the engines to their maximum safe capacity. She needed to reach them. Something deep inside her was telling her that this was important, that this was what she had been meant to do her entire life. As the Sky Whisper approached the coordinates, Emma began to see the landscape below. The planet was partially hidden behind 3 large asteroids and a thick nebula that churned with purple and blue clouds. The atmosphere was unlike anything Emma had ever encountered. It seemed to shift and flow in patterns that did not match normal weather systems. It was as if the very air was alive and aware of her presence. Emma initiated the landing sequence. She brought the ship down slowly and carefully, scanning for any defensive systems that might activate. The planet showed no signs of advanced technology or artificial defenses. As the ship descended through the cloud layers, Emma's heart pounded with anticipation and fear, mixed together in equal measure. She was about to meet creatures that belonged to legend and myth. She was about to discover whether the ancient stories contained any truth at all. The landing site was on a flat plateau surrounded by mountains that rose impossibly high. The ground was covered with vegetation that glowed faintly with bioluminescence, casting the landscape in shades of blue and green. Massive structures covered the area, buildings and monuments carved from stone and metal, all of them ancient and weathered but still standing. Some of the structures were covered with what looked like organic growth, vines and moss that seemed to be part of the original design, rather than invaders claiming the architecture. Then Emma saw them. The dragons were enormous beyond her ability to fully comprehend. The largest one had to be at least 500 meters long, with wings that could cover an entire city block. There were 5 of them in total, arranged in a semicircle around the largest structure, which appeared to be a massive mountain with an entrance carved into its base. The dragons did not move when the Sky Whisper landed. They simply watched with ancient eyes that held more intelligence than Emma had ever seen in any animal. Emma took a deep breath. She checked her suit systems, made sure all her equipment was working properly, and prepared to open the airlock. She knew that stepping out of the ship was a risk, but she also knew that she had to do it. These creatures had been calling to her. They had brought her here. Whatever was about to happen next would change everything. Emma pressed the button to open the door and stepped out into the alien world where dragons actually existed. The air smelled strange, like ozone and electricity and something organic that she could not quite identify. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal, so each step felt like she was walking in slow motion. The dragons watched her approach, their massive forms still and patient. Emma walked toward the largest one, the one she instinctively understood was the leader. She did not run. She did not hesitate. She simply walked forward with her head held high and her hand open and empty, showing that she carried no weapons and meant no harm. The largest dragon lowered its head as Emma approached, bringing the enormous face down to a level where she could see the details of its features clearly. The scales were not simply blue and silver as she had initially thought. They were layered with dozens of colors that shifted and changed as the light played across them. Some scales reflected the bioluminescent glow of the plants, while others seemed to absorb the light entirely. The dragon's eyes were the most remarkable feature. Pools of intelligence and warmth that held thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Emma reached out her hand slowly, moving with deliberate care so the dragon would understand her intentions were peaceful. She had learned this approach from her mother, who had taught her how to communicate with wild animals. Never make sudden movements. Never show fear. Always approach with respect and an open heart. The dragon's nostril was larger than Emma's entire head, and hot air that smelled of minerals and ancient stone flowed out of it. Emma placed her hand on the warm scales near the dragon's nose. The moment her skin touched the dragon's scales, something extraordinary happened. Information flooded into Emma's mind like a torrent of data. She saw images and felt emotions that were not her own. She understood in that instant that the dragon was showing her its memories, its purpose, and its existence. She felt the weight of 10,000 years of waiting, the loneliness of being the last of a kind, the hope that eventually someone would come who could understand. The connection lasted only seconds, but when it ended, Emma knew things that no human had ever known before. She understood that these dragons were not natural creatures that had evolved on this planet. They had been created by a civilization called the Architects, beings who possessed technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from magic. The Architects had engineered these dragons to be guardians and teachers, placed on thousands of worlds throughout the galaxy to protect developing civilizations until they reached a certain level of maturity and wisdom. Emma withdrew her hand, and tears were streaming down her face. The dragon released a sound that was almost like rumbling laughter, a deep vibration that caused the ground to shake slightly. Around the largest dragon, the other 4 dragons began to move, approaching Emma with their own deliberate care. Each one lowered its head in turn, and Emma touched each massive creature, experiencing their individual consciousness and their unique gifts. The second dragon was smaller and more graceful than the largest. Its scales were predominantly water blue, and when Emma touched it, she could feel its affinity with water and weather. She learned that this dragon's name was Mora, and it could command storms and seas, could predict weather patterns weeks in advance, and could heal itself through exposure to water. The third dragon had scales that shifted between green and brown, and it was the most warm and nurturing of all the dragons. This one called itself Kendra, and it controlled plant life and organic growth. It could cause forests to grow in places where nothing but barren rock existed before. The fourth dragon was sleek and dark, with scales that seemed to absorb light and gleam with subtle iridescence. This one was called Tessa, and it had the most unusual gift of all. It could sense all forms of electromagnetic radiation and could perceive the world in ways that no biological creature should be able to. It could see radio waves and cosmic radiation, could predict danger by sensing disruptions in the natural flow of energy. The fifth dragon was the most spectacular, with scales that ranged from deep orange to brilliant red to golden yellow. This one called itself Phoenix, and it had complete control over heat and flame. Emma spent hours with the dragons, learning their names and their abilities through touch and intuition. She discovered that they could not speak in words, but they communicated through images and emotions. They had been waiting for thousands of years for someone to come who could understand them. Someone who shared the bloodline of the Architects. Someone descended from the humans and elves who had first been created to serve as stewards and guardians. The largest dragon, the one Emma instinctively understood was the leader, showed her the deepest truth. His name was Silas, and he had been born during the time when the Architects were still active in this galaxy. He had lived through the wars, the vast conflicts that had scattered the Architects across the cosmos or destroyed them entirely. Silas was the oldest of the dragons, and the connection to him was the most intense of all. Emma experienced memories that stretched back over 10,000 years, saw the rise and fall of civilizations, witnessed the Architects creating life and leaving their creations behind with instructions and hopes. When the mental connection finally faded, Emma collapsed to her knees. The dragons surrounding her understood that she needed rest and restoration. They created a shelter by positioning their massive bodies around her, forming a protective circle. The heat from Phoenix warmed the space. The moisture from Mora created a comfortable atmosphere. The plants from Kendra's sphere of influence grew rapidly to create a cushioned ground cover. Tessa positioned herself to watch for any danger. Silas lay beside Emma, and she could feel the rumble of his breathing like the slow pulse of the planet itself. Emma fell asleep beneath the bodies of 5 dragons that had been waiting 10,000 years for someone like her to arrive. Her dreams were filled with images from the dragons' memories, with visions of the Architects in their time of power, with scenes of dragons flying through ancient skies above civilizations now lost to time. She dreamed of the moment when the Great Wars had come, when the Architects had made their choice to leave their creations behind with knowledge and hope, expecting that one day their guardians would be found by someone worthy of understanding their purpose. When Emma woke, the sun was rising over the mountains, casting everything in shades of gold and red. The dragons were still surrounding her, patient and still. She stood up and looked at each of them in turn. She understood now that her life had been leading to this moment. Everything she had studied, every theory she had pursued, every moment of loneliness and doubt had been preparation for this meeting. Emma walked with the dragons toward the great structure carved into the mountain. The entrance was enormous, large enough for all 5 dragons to walk through side by side. Inside, the structure opened into vast caverns and chambers, all of them filled with technology that seemed both alien and ancient. The walls glowed with the same bioluminescence as the plants outside, illuminating everything in soft blue and green light. Emma could see control panels and display screens, all of them still functioning after all these thousands of years. The dragons led her deeper into the structure, through chamber after chamber, until they reached what appeared to be a great library. The walls were covered with storage devices, crystalline structures that Emma recognized as data storage systems more advanced than anything humans had developed. The dragons showed her how to access the information, and Emma spent the entire night learning about the history of the architects, their technology, their dreams for the future of the galaxy. The data told a story of a civilization that had reached almost unlimited power, who had spread across the stars and created wonders beyond imagination. But power had also brought conflict, and the architects had eventually realized that they could not guide every developing civilization personally. They had made the decision to create guardians and stewards, placing them on the most promising worlds, leaving them with tools and knowledge, trusting that eventually the right people would be discovered, people who could understand the legacy and take it forward. Emma understood that moment had arrived. The dragons had been waiting for her specifically, though they did not know her name or her personal details. They had been waiting for an elf steward, someone descended from the bloodlines of the original guardians, someone who possessed the intelligence and wisdom to understand what was being offered. Emma realized she had a choice to make, a choice that would affect not just her own future but the future of the entire galaxy. The data that Emma found in the crystalline storage systems was overwhelming in its scope and depth. The architects had documented everything about their civilization, their achievements, their hopes, and their ultimate failure. They had described in precise detail how they had created the dragons, the specific genetic modifications and technological enhancements that gave each dragon its unique abilities. They had also created detailed records of how to maintain the dragons, how to work with them, and how to eventually help them evolve into the next stage of their development. Emma spent several days exploring the vast structure, discovering room after room filled with equipment and supplies, some of it she could not even begin to understand. Technology so advanced that it seemed impossible, but other things were more straightforward. She found food production systems that were still creating nutritious meals, water purification systems that had been running for 10,000 years, and power generation equipment that drew energy directly from the planet's core and would continue operating for thousands of years more. In one chamber, Emma discovered something that made her decision clearer. It was a message from the architects, stored in a format that allowed it to be translated into any language. The message appeared in her mind in perfect English, the voice gentle but authoritative. It explained that the dragons had been created with artificial aging, designed to reach adulthood over 50 years, and then remain in prime condition for hundreds of centuries. The message explained that the dragons needed mental stimulation and purpose, that without something meaningful to do, they would eventually fall into a state of dormancy. The voice explained that the architects had never intended for their guardians to simply wait passively. Instead, the dragons had been designed to actively seek out potential stewards, to send out signals and calls through dimensions of space that humans did not normally perceive. The dragons had been doing this for 10,000 years, and finally, their calls had reached someone who could answer. Emma Valentina was the first person in thousands of generations to actually arrive at this planet and establish a proper connection with the dragons. The message also contained a warning. The architects understood that the galaxy would eventually discover this planet and the dragons. They understood that not all who came would have good intentions. The dragons were designed to be guardians and teachers, but they were also devastatingly powerful weapons if they ever needed to be used in conflict. The architects hoped that Emma, as the first steward to arrive since the architects themselves had vanished, would work with the dragons to establish relationships with galactic governments and civilizations, to help humanity and other races understand that the dragons were meant to be partners in progress, rather than threats to be destroyed. Emma made her decision. She would bond with the dragons and take them back to human space. She would reveal the truth about the architects and the dragons, and she would work to establish peace and understanding between the dragons and the rest of galactic civilization. It was a monumental task, perhaps impossible, but Emma knew she had to try. The bonding process took several more days. Emma worked with each dragon individually, learning everything about their personalities and their preferences. She discovered that Silas, the oldest and largest dragon, was a natural leader and strategist. He was methodical and calm, always thinking several steps ahead. He had the ability to communicate with all the other dragons simultaneously, creating a kind of collective consciousness when needed. His control over stone and earth made him invaluable for construction and for dealing with environmental threats. Mora was the adventurer, always eager to explore new places and meet new creatures. She was curious about everything and had a playful nature that sometimes masked her incredible power. Mora's control over water and weather made her essential for any exploration of ocean worlds or atmospheric studies. She could navigate using weather patterns and could survive in environments that would be deadly to most other creatures. Kendra was the nurturer and healer. She took pleasure in helping things grow and develop. She had a maternal nature and was deeply connected to all forms of organic life. Emma discovered that Kendra could heal wounds and diseases, not just in plants but in any living creature. She could communicate with animals on a level that went beyond normal animal communication. She could convince predators to become peaceful, and could rally prey animals to defend themselves as a coordinated group. Tessa was the strategist and censor. She was quieter than the other dragons, more introspective and thoughtful. She possessed the most unique perspective, seeing the world in ways that no other creature could. Her electromagnetic perception gave her an advantage that made her perfect for reconnaissance and tactical analysis. She could detect distant ships and dangerous radiation, could predict solar events and asteroids before they became visible to conventional instruments. Phoenix was the warrior and the passionate one. She carried intensity in every movement, and her control over heat and flame made her terrifying in combat. But she was also compassionate and protective of those she cared about. She took her responsibility for protecting the others seriously, and was the first to notice any potential threats. Her heat and flame could forge metal, could burn through obstacles, and in an emergency, could destroy anything that threatened the dragons or their allies. On the final night before departure, Emma performed a ceremony that she created based on the traditions of her mother's colony. She stood before all 5 dragons and made formal bonds with each of them. She spoke words of commitment and promise, words in the old elf language that she had learned from her mother. She promised to be their advocate and their voice in a galaxy that did not yet know they existed. She promised to work toward a future where dragons and humans could coexist peacefully. The dragons responded by singing. It was a sound unlike anything Emma had ever heard before, a harmony of frequencies that seemed to vibrate through every cell in her body. The sound was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, a song of ancient power and hope for the future. The ground beneath Emma's feet shook, and the bioluminescent plants glowed brighter in response to the dragon song. The mountains seemed to echo the music, carrying it across the entire planet. Emma returned to the Sky Whisper and began the preparations for departure. The dragons would not fit inside the ship, so Emma had to remove most of her supplies and equipment to make room for one piece of technology that the architects had created specifically for this purpose. It was a device that could create a warp field large enough to carry all 5 dragons through space at faster than light speeds, kept in stasis so they would not age during the journey. The dragons entered the chamber that contained the warp field generator, and Emma activated the system. The dragons faded from visibility as the energy field wrapped around them, placing them in a state between dimensions where time moved differently. Emma sealed the chamber and returned to the cockpit of the Sky Whisper. She entered the coordinates for the human capital world and engaged the engines. As the ship lifted off from the planet's surface, Emma looked back at the world where dragons had waited in hiding for 10,000 years. She knew that everything was about to change. The revelation of the dragons would shake galactic society to its foundations. Some people would want to study them, some would want to exploit them, some would want to destroy them out of fear. But Emma also knew that the dragons were more than capable of defending themselves. They had been designed by a civilization far beyond human comprehension, and they possessed abilities that seemed like magic to modern understanding. Emma set the autopilot and began composing messages to send ahead to human space. She would need to prepare the galaxy for what was coming. She would need to work with government officials and military leaders, prepare humanity for the reality of dragon guardians. The Sky Whisper moved through space, carrying Emma and 5 ancient dragons toward a future that neither had ever anticipated, but both were ready to face together. The journey back through space took several weeks. Emma spent most of her time composing detailed reports and messages to send ahead to human space. She documented everything she had learned about the dragons, their abilities, their origins, and the existence of the architects. She included data from the crystalline storage systems, translated into formats that human computers could read and understand. Emma knew that her messages would create chaos when they reached human authorities. The existence of dragons would challenge everything that humanity believed about the history of the galaxy. It would force scientists to reconsider theories about natural evolution and the development of life. It would create both excitement and fear. Some people would view the dragons as a blessing, a chance to learn from ancient wisdom. Others would view them as a threat, potential weapons that needed to be controlled or destroyed. She also composed personal messages to her colleagues at the Odyssey station. She wrote to Raymond Foster, the station commander, and explained that she was returning with proof of extraterrestrial life, with evidence of an ancient civilization that had shaped the development of intelligent species throughout the galaxy. She warned him to prepare for controversy and to protect her research from those who might want to suppress it or steal it for their own purposes. Emma spent time communicating through the warp field communication system with the dragons as well. The system allowed her to interface with the consciousness of each dragon, even while they were in stasis. She learned more about their personal histories and their experiences over the thousands of years they had lived. Silas shared memories of the early days of the architects, times when multiple dragon colonies existed across dozens of worlds. He told her about the Great Wars, about entire civilizations that had been created and then destroyed, about the loneliness of being the last survivor of something so great. Mora told Emma about the worlds she had wanted to visit, the oceans she had dreamed of seeing, the storms she had imagined riding. She expressed joy that she would finally have the chance to experience these things with Emma. She shared memories of the way the first world had smelled before the wars, memories of vast coastlines with cliffs that glowed in colors that human eyes had not evolved to perceive. Kendra showed Emma memories of forests that covered entire continents, ecosystems so complex and beautiful that they made Emma weep just thinking about them. Kendra expressed deep sadness about the destruction of so much life during the wars, but also hoped that she would have the opportunity to restore some of that beauty to the world she had been created to protect. Tessa's communication was different from the others. She did not share memories exactly, but rather perspectives and analyses. She explained to Emma how the electromagnetic patterns of human technology had been reaching across space for the last 100 years, how the dragon communication systems had been tracking these signals, how they had been waiting for the signals to reach a certain level of sophistication before attempting contact. Tessa had been analyzing the pattern of human development and had determined that humanity had reached the critical point where they could potentially understand and accept the reality of the dragon's phoenix. Expressed raw eagerness and anticipation. She wanted to see combat, wanted to test her abilities against new challenges, wanted to protect Emma from whatever dangers the galaxy might present. But beneath the warrior's eagerness, Emma could sense something deeper, a desire for purpose and meaning that had been lacking for 10,000 years. Phoenix had been created to be a warrior, but she wanted more than just the simple existence of waiting. She wanted her strength to actually matter for something. As the Sky Whisper approached the outer regions of human space, Emma received a message from Raymond Foster. His response indicated that he had received her preliminary reports and that reactions were already beginning to cascade through human society. Some scientists were calling her a fraud. Others were demanding to examine her evidence immediately. Military commanders were raising concern about the dragons and what they might represent as a threat. Religious leaders were weighing in on whether dragons were divine creatures or abominations. Raymond assured Emma that he would protect her research and support her claims. He had reviewed the data she had sent and was convinced of the truth of her discoveries. He informed her that the human government was already preparing a response team to meet her when she arrived at the capital world. They wanted to debrief her extensively and prepare for the revelation of the dragons to the general public. Emma also received messages from her mother. Her mother, whose name was Alara, expressed both pride and concern for her daughter. She understood the significance of Emma's discovery because she came from a culture that had always known that the old legends contained truth. Her mother sent Emma a blessing in the old elf language, words of protection and strength that Emma repeated to herself as the ship approached her destination. The capital world, called New Corinth, was a massive sphere of artificial habitats surrounding a natural planet. Millions of humans lived in the orbital stations, and billions more lived on the surface of the planet itself. Emma had been to this world only a few times in her life. She found it overwhelming, too crowded and too loud after spending so much of her career on remote research stations. As the Sky Whisper began its approach to the designated landing zone, Emma activated the warp field release sequence. The dragons would gradually emerge from stasis as the ship descended, their consciousness returning to full awareness as they entered normal space. She wanted them to be awake and aware for their arrival, so they could adjust to the sensations of moving through normal space and experiencing the presence of billions of humans for the first time. The dragons' emergence was gradual. Emma felt their consciousness returning through the warp field communication system, each dragon becoming aware and alert. She sensed their wonder and their apprehension as they realized that they were no longer on their home planet, that they were traveling through space toward an unknown destination. Emma tried to prepare them mentally for what they would encounter. She explained about human cities and technology. She told them about the diversity of human culture and belief systems. She warned them that not everyone would welcome them with open arms, that there would be skeptics and those who viewed the dragons with fear or hostility. The dragons accepted this information with the calm wisdom that came from 10,000 years of existence. Silas assured Emma that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Mora expressed excitement about finally seeing the wider galaxy that she had only experienced through the knowledge systems of the ancient architects. Kendra was concerned about the effect of human civilization on planetary ecosystems. Tessa was already analyzing the electromagnetic patterns of New Corinth, building a detailed map of the station's systems and vulnerabilities. Phoenix was eager for action and ready to defend Emma against any threat. The Sky Whisper passed through the outer defenses of New Corinth's security perimeter. Military ships moved into position around the small explorer vessel, not attacking but making their presence known. Emma received authorization to proceed to the designated landing zone at the Central Research Complex. As the ship began its final descent, Emma looked at the 5 dragons that were now fully awake and aware within the holding chamber. She could feel their emotions through the connection they shared, a mix of hope and fear and purpose. She sent them a message of courage and commitment, a reminder of everything they had discussed and planned. Within moments, the Sky Whisper would land on New Corinth. Within hours, the entire galaxy would know that dragons existed. Within days, everything would change. The era of humanity facing the cosmos alone had ended. A new chapter was beginning, written in the language of ancient power and impossible dreams. The landing of the Sky Whisper at the Central Research Complex created the most significant event in human history since the first faster-than-light journey into space. The ship's arrival had been carefully orchestrated through government channels, and military forces had been positioned throughout the complex to handle any situation that might arise. Emma was more nervous during this landing than she had been during her entire journey through space. She knew what was about to happen, and she knew that the consequences would be permanent and far-reaching. As the ship touched down on the landing pad, Emma sent one final message through the warp field communication system to the dragons. She told them to remain calm, to trust her judgment, and to remember that they had been created for this moment. She told them that the fate of the galaxy might depend on how the next few hours unfolded. Emma opened the airlock and emerged from the Sky Whisper onto the landing pad. Immediately, she was surrounded by armed guards and officials. They wanted to begin the debriefing immediately, wanted to examine her equipment, wanted to access the data she had collected. Emma kept insisting that she needed to see Raymond Foster first, that she needed to coordinate with him on how to reveal the existence of the dragons to the human government. It took several hours to navigate through the protocol and bureaucracy, but eventually Emma was brought to Raymond Foster's private office in the research complex. Foster was a man in his 60s, gray-haired and weathered by decades of work in space. He had always supported Emma's research even when others doubted her theories. When he saw her in person, the first thing he did was embrace her. Emma spent the next 2 hours explaining everything she had discovered. She showed Raymond the data from the crystalline storage systems. She explained about the architects and their role in creating life throughout the galaxy. She described the dragons and their individual abilities in detail. Raymond listened without interrupting. absorbing the information with the mind of a true scientist who understood the significance of what he was being told. When Emma finished her presentation, Raymond sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. He told Emma that what she had discovered was the most important finding in the history of human space exploration. He explained that this discovery would fundamentally change human understanding of the galaxy and humanity's place within it. He then asked the most important question of all. He asked if she truly believed that the dragons could be trusted to cooperate with humanity. Emma's answer was unequivocal. She explained that the dragons were not wild beasts, that they were intelligent beings with their own morality and their own goals. She said that they had been designed to be guardians and teachers, that they had spent 10,000 years waiting for this moment. She told Raymond that she believed the dragons would work with humanity to help guide the species toward a better future. Raymond then made a decision. He contacted the highest levels of the human government and requested an emergency session of the Council of Nations. He informed them that a discovery of unprecedented importance had been made and that they needed to convene immediately. He told them that the decision of how to respond to this discovery would determine whether humanity would move forward into a new era of enlightenment or whether they would retreat into fear and conflict. The Council of Nations convened within 4 hours. All the major human governments had representatives present, along with representatives from allied alien species that had treaties with humanity. Raymond presented Emma's findings to the council, with Emma herself answering questions from the representatives. The atmosphere in the council chamber was tense with anticipation and skepticism. Some representatives demanded that the dragons be examined by scientists before they were allowed to roam freely. Others suggested that the dragons should be controlled or contained until their intentions could be verified. A few representatives expressed enthusiasm and a desire to establish peaceful relations with the dragons immediately. The debate went on for hours with passionate arguments on both sides. Finally, Emma requested an opportunity to speak directly to the council. She stood before all the representatives and told them the story of her meeting with the dragons. She described Silas and his ancient memories. She talked about Mora's adventurous spirit and Kendra's compassion. She explained Tessa's unique perspective and Phoenix's warrior's heart. She painted a picture of 5 magnificent beings that had been waiting in isolation for thousands of years, hoping that someone would eventually arrive who could understand them and bring them into relationship with the wider galaxy. Emma made a proposition to the council. She proposed that the dragons be allowed to emerge from the Sky Whisper under controlled conditions. She suggested that they be given an opportunity to demonstrate their peaceful intentions. She promised that if the dragons showed any sign of aggression or posed any threat, the military forces present could act immediately, but she insisted that humanity should at least give the dragons a chance, should at least hear what they had to say before making judgments. The debate continued for another hour, but eventually a consensus emerged. The council agreed to allow the dragons to be released, provided that extensive security measures remained in place. They would establish a formal first contact protocol and would attempt to initiate diplomatic relations with the dragons. Emma returned to the Sky Whisper and began the process of releasing the dragons from the warp field holding chamber. The process was complex, requiring precise adjustments to the dimensional frequency to allow the dragons to transition from stasis to normal space without suffering any harm. Emma moved through the ship's systems methodically, checking each parameter carefully. When the dimensional barrier finally faded, the 5 dragons opened their eyes and became fully aware of their new surroundings. Emma could feel their emotions through the connection they shared, a mix of confusion and wonder. The chamber that contained them was barely large enough for them to fit, and they needed to be released into the open air quickly. Emma guided the first dragon, Silas, toward the airlock. The ancient dragon moved slowly and carefully, understanding from the connection with Emma that he needed to emerge peacefully and non-threateningly. When Silas stepped out of the Sky Whisper onto the landing pad for the first time, the collective gasp of the thousands of humans gathered to witness the event was audible throughout the complex. Silas stood at full height, his head reaching toward the sky, his massive form a testimony to the power and majesty of the ancient dragons. He released a low rumble of sound that vibrated through the ground and through the bodies of every human present. It was not threatening, but it was absolutely undeniable. Everyone watching knew that they were in the presence of something greater and more powerful than themselves. One by one, the other dragons emerged from the ship. Mora stepped out with graceful elegance, her water-blue scales reflecting the light of the sun and the artificial lights of the complex. Kendra followed, her green and brown scales seeming to blend with the natural elements around her. Tessa emerged with calm purposefulness, her dark scales absorbing the light as she surveyed the landscape with her electromagnetic perception. Finally, Phoenix emerged, her red and gold scales blazing in the sunlight like living fire. The 5 dragons arranged themselves in a semicircle around Emma, who stood between them and the gathered humans. The military forces present remained ready to act, their weapons trained on the dragons, but the expected violence did not occur. Instead, Silas stepped forward and lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect and peaceful intention. The gesture broke the tension. Humans began to realize that the dragons were not attacking, that they were demonstrating peaceful intent. Emma could see understanding dawning in people's faces as they began to comprehend that this was a negotiation, a first contact between 2 intelligent species, not an invasion or an attack. Over the following days, Emma worked with the dragons and with the human government to establish communication and understanding. The dragons explained their history and their purpose through Emma, who translated their thoughts and emotions into language that humans could comprehend. The government officials began to understand the significance of what the architects had left behind. Silas told the council that the dragons had been created to teach and guide, not to rule or dominate. He explained that the architects had believed that each developing civilization needed to walk its own path, but that they could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge of those who had come before. The dragons offered to share technological knowledge and historical information that could help humanity avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. The council was amazed and intrigued. They began making plans for how to integrate the dragons into human society, how to establish research facilities where the dragons could work with human scientists, how to share the knowledge of the architects with the wider galaxy. Emma realized that her journey was far from over. She had opened a door that could never be closed. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had encountered the dragons, and together, they would begin a new era of exploration and enlightenment. As she stood between the dragons and the humans, Emma understood that her role was just beginning.